Aisha woke before the sky turned light. She slid out of bed and tiptoed past her younger brother, who slept curled in his blanket, and her mother, whose soft snores came through the thin bedroom door. The air in the house was cool and quiet. Aisha touched the photograph on her bedside table, herself holding a certificate for best essay at her school. Today was the day she would fly alone for the first time. Her heart fluttered with hope. She dressed quickly, choosing a simple blue dress and a warm sweater. In the mirror, she smoothed back her hair and took a deep breath. She imagined the faces she would meet at the youth summit, the talks she would give, the friends she would make. She thought of the bigger picture, how she could use what she learned to help children in her village who could never leave home. She felt a thrill at the chance to make a real difference. Downstairs, her mother had brewed tea and made toasted bread. Aisha ate a quiet breakfast at the small kitchen table while her father, the aviation minister, reviewed papers in his study. They exchanged smiles. Her mother packed a small bag with extra notebooks and pens. Her brother gave her a shy wave. The family wished her luck, and her father paused work to press a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Enjoy every moment," he said softly. Aisha beamed. The drive to the airport was calm. The streets were still waking up, and the sun painted golden stripes on the buildings. Aisha pressed her forehead against the car window and watched workers unloading crates at shops. She rehearsed her introduction speech under her breath. She imagined standing before a crowd of young people from different regions, feeling proud and confident. At the terminal, her father guided her to the check-in counter. He used his special pass to help her skip the longest lines. Aisha handed her passport and ticket to the clerk, who smiled kindly and stamped her boarding card. She tucked it in her pocket like a small treasure. She hugged her mother and brother, then walked ahead with her father, who reminded her to stay close too. The crowd and keep her bag zipped. Inside the main hall, Aisha paused to look around. People bustled with luggage. Announcements crackled overhead, and the smell of coffee wafted from a nearby cafe. She bought a small water bottle and glanced at the flight display on a glowing screen. Gate 14, departure in 2 hours. She found a large window overlooking the runway. Plane taxied past, and she felt a surge of excitement. Soon she would be on that wide-winged bird, soaring above the clouds. They settled near the gate area. Her father spoke briefly with airport staff about general flights and schedules. Aisha sat on a row of chairs, legs swinging. She opened her notebook and reviewed bullet points she had written about youth leadership. She wanted everything to be perfect. The waiting area grew busier as more families arrived. Aisha watched a toddler laughing as his mother pushed a stroller. A group of students chatted in another corner about their own projects. When the boarding announcement rang out, Aisha felt a little knot in her stomach. It was time. She stood and smoothed her dress. Her father offered to walk with her to the gate door, but she shook her head. "I want to go alone," she said. And he smiled, proud. "Be brave. I'll be just inside," he said, pointing toward a seat behind the glass wall. Aisha nodded and waved, then stepped forward. At the gate desk, the agent looked at Aisha's boarding pass and passport. Aisha said good morning and smiled. The agent didn't return the smile. He frowned, flipped through the pages of her passport, then stared at her name. Aisha felt a small chill. She held her breath and waited. Then the agent spoke. "Can't board this flight," he said flatly. Aisha's mind went blank. She looked down at her hands, which trembled slightly. "But this is my ticket," she protested softly. "I have to be there." The agent repeated himself, louder this time. No boarding. He folded her boarding pass and handed it back. A crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the raised voices. Aisha's stomach twisted. She tried again. Please." But the agent turned away. A few people standing in line glanced over. Some whispered to each other. Aisha felt all eyes on her. Her cheeks burned. She wanted to shrink into herself, but she stood upright, trying to hold her head high. A soft, cruel laugh echoed behind her. A man in a dark suit glanced at his watch and smirked while looking at Aisha. A whisper of amusement passed through the small crowd. Aisha's chest tightened. She swallowed hard, tears prickling at the corner of her eyes. She looked back. At the agent, her voice quivering. "Sir, I'm sorry if there's a mistake. Can I please talk to your manager? The agent shrugged and turned away. A whisper of laughter floated over. Aisha felt her vision blur, blinked to clear her mind, took a steadying breath, and gently placed her hand on the counter.
Please.
She said with more strength, I need your help. The agent sighed as if bothered. He gestured toward a side door. Manager, he muttered over his shoulder. Aisha's heart pounded as she followed the agent through the door. The room beyond was small and plain, with a desk and 2 chairs. The manager sat behind the desk, eyebrows raised. What's the problem? He asked, businesslike. Aisha held up her documents and told him about her flight and her ticket. She tried to keep her voice calm, though every word felt sticky and heavy. The manager glanced at her papers, then at Aisha herself. He pursed his lips. Outside the door, the agent leaned, arms crossed, watching. Aisha shifted her weight, nearly ready to cry. She pictured her father entering the room any second, and that image gave her a spark of hope. Then, in the hallway, she heard a firm voice call her name. Aisha. She turned, and there he was, Minister Kamara, in a crisp suit, face calm, but eyes sharp. He stepped inside and smiled at Aisha. Relief washed over her. The manager rose and bowed his head slightly. The agent straightened. Aisha touched her father's hand, her knees steadying. The laughter and shame of moments ago felt like a dream. Her father spoke quietly but firmly to the manager, and the rest faded behind them. Looked at her father's face, kind, proud, protective, knew everything would be all right. Aisha stood at the gate, her small fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She watched the agent stare down at her boarding pass and passport, as though they were a puzzle he refused to solve. His brow furrowed, and he sighed loudly as if her papers were a burden on his busy morning. Around her, passengers shuffled and whispered, their heavy suitcases bumping against the floor. Aisha tried to meet the agent's eyes and offer a polite smile, but he turned away and spoke to a colleague in a low voice. I can't let her on, she heard him say without looking up. The agent's words felt like ice in Aisha's veins. She blinked, uncertain that she had heard correctly. But why? She asked softly, her voice trembled. The agent finally raised his head. His features were plain and bored, like someone who did the same job every day without care. Forward and tapped her boarding pass with a blunt fingernail. There's an issue with your documentation, he said. You're not allowed on this flight. Aisha's stomach dropped. She swallowed hard. My ticket is valid, she whispered. My passport is real. She slid her passport across the counter, hoping that seeing all the official stamps would change his mind. The agent just pushed it back. A hush fell over the small crowd that had gathered. Aisha felt every eye on her, saw the flicker of curiosity and amusement in people's faces. She looked up and found the gaze of a man in a dark suit. Da-da. He raised an eyebrow and let out a short laugh, the sound cutting her like a blade. Aisha's cheeks heated. Da. She wanted to disappear under the polished floor. Tears threatened her eyes. She tried to blink them away and forced herself to speak again. Please, she said, her voice catching. I'm going to a youth summit. It's very important. She reached for her backpack, opened it, and showed the agent her neatly packed notebooks and pens. She wanted him to see she was serious, that this trip meant everything to her, but he only shrugged. Rules are rules, he said flatly. He pushed her boarding pass back toward her and turned to call the next passenger. The sound of his voice ordering the next person forward sent a fresh wave of shame through Aisha. She pressed a hand to her mouth and tried to hold back sobs. Her vision blurred, and she forced herself to breathe slowly. She stepped back a few inches, her back nearly touching a row of chairs. Her legs felt weak, and she almost sank down onto the nearest seat. She wanted to curl up and hide, but she forced herself to stand tall. She had dreamed of this trip for months. She thought of how she had stayed up late writing her speech, practiced in front of her family mirror, even volunteered at the school debate club to gain confidence. All of that seemed lost now. Behind her, The whispers grew louder. A young woman in a travel jacket shook her head and said, "That's terrible." A man with headphones shifted uncomfortably. Aisha heard someone say, "Why is she being treated like that?" A small group of passengers leaned forward to see what was happening. Their faces showed concern, but no one stepped forward to help. Aisha took another deep breath and approached the counter again, determined. She placed both hands on the cool surface and spoke with more firmness. "Sir, please. I have been looking forward to this for so long. My parents helped me prepare. My father is the aviation minister. Can you please check again?" She did not want to threaten him with her father's name, but she hoped the truth would make him listen. The agent paused. His expression flickered between annoyance and hesitation. He glanced at the row of waiting passengers, saw their curious faces, and sighed as if he felt trapped. He picked up the phone on his desk and pressed a button. He said into the receiver, voice clipped, "There's a problem here." Then he handed the phone to Aisha with an impatient flick of his wrist. "Tell him yourself," he muttered. Aisha took the phone with shaking hands. She pressed it to her ear. "Hello?" she said, voice small. A quiet voice answered, calling. Her name? The manager asked for details, and Aisha explained once more, stumbling over words as tears filled her throat. She told him about her boarding pass, her valid passport, the summit, and her father's work. She tried not to cry, but one small sob escaped. She covered her mouth and looked down. Around her, the crowd held its breath. The laughter of the man in the suit had stopped, but his smirk remained. Some people shifted away, not wanting to stare. A mother held her child closer. A teenager tapped at her phone, perhaps ready to record another scandal. The airport lights above seemed too bright, and the polished floor reflected her figure like a sad shadow. When Aisha finished, there was a pause. The manager asked a few quick questions, then said, "Please stay there. I will come to you." He clicked the phone off. Aisha held the line for a moment, wondering if he would really come. She swallowed again and glanced around, seeing pity in some eyes and disapproval in others. Her breathing steadied as she clung to hope. The gate agent stepped aside and Aisha felt a moment's relief, thinking she could talk privately or clear up the confusion. But then he turned to his next task, stamping another boarding pass with no urgency. Aisha took a small step away from the counter, feeling the weight of her damp boarding pass in her hand. She tucked it carefully into her sweater pocket, afraid of tearing it. Her thoughts drifted to home. She thought of her mother's gentle hands on her shoulders when she was small, her brother's shy grin, her father explaining the magic of flight when she first loved airplanes. She remembered the day she decided she would speak at a summit to help children who could not leave their villages. She had written letters to the youth council, collected stories, and practiced speaking in front of her family. Every memory shone brightly in her mind, shining against the dull gray of this morning's embarrassment. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "I can do this." It was not for the gate agent or the crowd. It was for herself. She opened her eyes and stood straighter. A tear slid down her cheek, but she brushed it away before it could fall, lifted her head and looked at the glass walls of the terminal. Beyond them, a plane waited on the runway, its engine silent but promising. She imagined herself stepping onto that plane, taking her place among young leaders, and felt a spark of courage. But the spark flickered when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned, expecting the manager. Instead, it was the gate agent, his face blank. "You can leave now," he said. "You're not flying today." His words felt final, like a door. Slamming shut, Aisha's chest tightened, and she let out a shaky breath. She folded her arms across her chest, as if protecting her heart. She tried to speak, to beg again, but the words stuck. Just then, the murmurs rose. The crowd shuffled, and voices rose in low tones. Aisha felt their frustration and sadness mix with her own. Some passengers turned away, unwilling to watch. Others stared, anger flickering in their eyes. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed at Aisha as if asking why she stood alone. Aisha forced herself to take one small step back, away from the counter. She closed her eyes and pictured her parents. She pictured her father in his office, speaking calmly to people who would listen. She pictured her mother cooking meals and telling stories. She pictured her brother running to her with a drawing. In that quiet place in her mind, she found a soft calm. She opened her eyes again, wiped her cheeks, and lifted her chin. She turned away from the gate desk and walked a few paces toward the glass wall, where her father was seated on the other side. She could just see his silhouette, reading papers. She pressed her palm against the glass, as if to send him a silent message. Her heart ached with both shame and relief. She knew help was coming, that her father would protect her. Behind her, the airport carried on. Announcements echoed. Suitcases rolled. Life moved forward. But for Aisha, time stretched in the moment before her father's arrival, a moment of painful waiting, a moment of silent strength blooming in her chest as she stood alone, yet unbroken. Aisha stood just inside the glass wall, her palms still pressed lightly against it. When she heard the soft click of her father's shoes on the tile floor, she turned and her heart lifted at the sight of him stepping through the gate area. Wore his dark suit and crisp white shirt, his tie straight and his posture calm but strong. In that moment, Aisha felt safe again. Her father paused beside her, glanced at the gate desk, and smiled reassuringly. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Aisha's voice caught as she whispered, "Thank you for coming." He nodded and squeezed her shoulder once, then turned toward the gate agent. The agent straightened, surprise and a hint of fear passing across his face. He barely met the minister's eye. "Minister Kamara," he said, voice wavering. "This young lady," he began, but trailed off under the minister's steady gaze. Minister Kamara spoke quietly, but each word carried weight. "My daughter has a valid ticket. She has a valid passport. You refused her boarding without explanation. I would like to know why." The agent swallowed and looked at the boarding pass in his hand as if reading it for the first time. A small crowd of passengers watched. Some recognized the minister. In news photos, a few whispered among themselves. Aisha felt their eyes on her father as much as on her. She shifted close to him, drawing courage from his calm presence. The agent cleared his throat. "Sir, there was a problem with her documentation." His words sounded weak. He glanced at his manager who had just entered the area, phone in hand. The manager offered a quick, reassuring nod, as though supporting. Aisha sighed. Minister Kamara nodded thoughtfully. "May I see the documentation you believe is invalid?" He held out his hand. The agent hesitated, then placed Aisha's passport and boarding pass on the counter. The minister picked them up and examined them carefully. He flipped through the passport pages, then looked at the stamped visa and entry stamps. He checked the boarding pass against the flight number on the screen above. "This is all in order," he said, handing the documents back. "There is no issue here." He turned back to the agent. "You will allow her to board immediately." The agent's face flushed. He glanced at the passengers, then at the minister. Embarrassed, he nodded and pressed a button on his console. "Of course, Minister. I'm sorry for the confusion." He handed a new boarding pass to Aisha. "Here is your boarding pass." "I apologize, miss." Aisha took it with trembling fingers. She looked up at the agent. "Thank you," she whispered. She managed a small, polite smile. The agent gave a curt nod and stepped aside, almost backing away. Minister Kamara placed his hand on Aisha's back. "Let's move to the departure door," he said quietly. Aisha followed him, her legs feeling unsteady, but her heart lighter. As they walked, she heard whispers behind her, words like privilege, abuse of power, and shame. But she also heard apology, respect, and protection. The mix of sound made her feel both strong and sad. They reached the departure door where a new agent scanned their passes. That agent greeted them kindly, saying, "Welcome aboard, Minister, and welcome aboard, Miss Kamara." Aisha smiled and stepped through the door into the jet bridge. Soon as they were alone, she released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her father closed the bridge door behind them. He turned to her and said softly, "Are you okay?" Aisha nodded, tears welling again, but this time from relief. "Yes," she managed. "Thank you for standing up for me." He smiled and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "You were brave," he said. "You stood tall, even when it was hard. Aisha looked at him, pride shining in her eyes. She thought of how alone she had felt moments before, how powerless, and how strong she felt now with him by her side. They walked down the aisle of the plane together. The flight attendants greeted them warmly. One offered to help with her carry-on bag, and another showed them to their seats near the front. Aisha stowed her bag and sat down, pressing her boarding pass against her heart. Her father took the seat beside her. As the plane filled, Aisha looked out the window. The runway lights glinted in the rising sun. She felt a surge of excitement for the journey ahead. Her father leaned close and whispered, "I'll be just across the aisle. You focus on your summit." She nodded and smiled, feeling his pride and love surround her like a warm blanket. Once the plane took off, Aisha opened her notebook. She scribbled a quick note. "Be kind, be brave, be heard." She thought of her own words, of how she wanted to use her voice to help children back home. The summit awaited her, but this moment, the moment she had felt both fear and dignity would stay with her forever. Below them, the city grew small. The plane climbed, and clouds rolled by like soft pillows. Aisha watched them, then closed her eyes and imagined her speech. She pictured the audience, saw her words shining like stars. She felt ready. When the flight attendants dimmed the cabin lights, she rested her head on the window shade and remembered every detail of her morning: the quiet house, her family's smiles, the humiliation at the gate, the gathering crowd, the weight of being denied, and finally, her father's calm arrival and defense. Each moment had shaped her, taught her about courage and hope. She opened her eyes and saw her father's face, peaceful beside her. She reached for his hand. He took it, giving it a gentle squeeze. Together, they looked ahead, toward the horizon. Toward the summit, toward a future where respect and fairness would lift every child everywhere they went. The manager led Aisha and her father into a small office just beyond the gate area. The walls were plain, painted a soft cream color, and a single window let in morning light. A sturdy wooden desk sat in the center, with two simple chairs facing it. Aisha took a seat, smoothing her dress and clutching her notebook to her chest. Her father stood beside her, calm and composed. The manager motioned for the gate agent to remain by the door. He closed it gently and turned back to them, folding his hands on the desk. "Minister Kamara," he said in a respectful tone, "I apologize for the trouble. Please tell me exactly what happened." Aisha took a steadying breath. She set her notebook on her lap and looked at the manager. "I arrived at gate 14 with my boarding pass and passport," she began. "The agent checked my papers and then told me I could not board. He did not explain why. I asked him to call you, and he did. But he refused to listen to me. He laughed with other staff, and some passengers laughed too. It was very embarrassing." Her father nodded, his dark eyes serious. "My daughter has all the correct documents," he said. "There is no reason to deny her boarding. I want to know why this happened and to ensure it does not happen again." The manager frowned and looked toward the gate agent, who shifted uneasily by the door. "That should never have happened," he said, voice low. "I'm truly sorry. There was a misunderstanding. I will correct it right away." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a printed form. He scribbled a few lines, stamped it with the airline seal, and slid it across the desk. "This is a formal apology to Miss Kamara, and to you, Minister," he said. "I will also speak with the gate staff and arrange retraining on proper procedure and respect for passengers." Aisha watched as her father took the letter and examined it briefly. She felt a knot in her stomach ease with relief. The paper held real meaning, an admission of fault, and a promise of change. She remembered the weight of humiliation she had felt just moments ago. Now, in this small office, she felt her dignity restoring itself, piece by piece. The manager stood and offered his hand to Aisha. She accepted it, and he gave a gentle nod. "Miss Kamara, you should never have been treated that way," he said. "Please accept my apology." Aisha nodded, her voice coming slowly. "Thank you," she said softly. "I appreciate it." Her father spoke up next. "I would also like a report on this incident. I want to see what steps you will take to prevent this in the future."
Ow!
The manager bowed his head in agreement. Yes, Minister. You will have that report before the end of the week. Aisha felt warmth at her father's side. She looked at him and he gave her a small smile. She felt proud of him and also proud of herself for standing up and speaking the truth. The room felt brighter now, filled with promise instead of tension. The manager excused himself and left to talk privately with the gate agent. Aisha and her father rose from their seats and walked toward the door. In the hallway, a uniformed supervisor waited. She greeted Minister Kamara respectfully, then turned to Aisha. Miss, here is your reissued boarding pass, she said, handing over a fresh card. We have arranged for you to board immediately priority boarding, if you wish. Aisha took the pass gratefully. Thank you, she said. Her voice sounded stronger than before. The supervisor smiled. I'm sorry again for what happened, she said. Please let me know if you need anything else. Aisha tucked the boarding pass into her notebook and straightened her shoulders. She felt a sense of calm certainty she had never known before. Her father placed a hand on her back and nodded as if to say, Go on, you deserve this. They walked back toward the gate, passing by passengers who looked at them with sympathetic eyes. A few offered gentle smiles. At the boarding door, a flight attendant greeted them. Minister Kamara, Miss Kamara, welcome aboard. Her tone was warm and welcoming, free of any hint of earlier cruelty. She showed Aisha onto the plane first. Inside the cabin, the hum of voices and rolling suitcases created a soft buzz. Aisha found her seat near the front and settled in, placing her notebook on the seatbelt tray. Her heart beat with excitement. She unzipped her bag and took out a pen, making notes about what she had learned from the experience. How quick judgment can hurt people, how important it is to speak up, and how real change can follow when leaders set clear standards. Her father took the seat beside her and placed his briefcase in the overhead bin. He turned to look at Aisha. Are you ready for your journey? He asked, his tone gentle. Aisha smiled, feeling a bright spark of confidence. Yes, she said. I am. The flight attendants began safety demonstrations. Aisha watched carefully, though her mind was already soaring ahead. She imagined the summit hall filled with young delegates from many regions. She saw herself speaking on stage, sharing her story about respect and fairness. She thought of the children in her village listening wide-eyed to her words. She pictured their faces lighting up with hope. As the plane taxied down the runway, Aisha pressed her hand to the window and watched the ground speed increase. Her father squeezed her hand. Remember, he said softly, you have the power to change things. Today you showed courage, and tomorrow you will use that courage to help others. Tears of gratitude filled Aisha's eyes. She nodded, fighting to keep them inside. I will, she whispered. The engines roared and the plane lifted into the sky. Below them, the city shrank, buildings turning into squares and lines. Leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, imagining the clouds she had dreamed of, soft and white. She thought of the morning's events, waking early, the hum of the house, her family's love, the shock at the gate, the pain of being laughed at, and finally, the comfort of her father's presence and the manager's apology. Each moment had shaped her, teaching her about injustice and empathy, about strength and grace. She opened her eyes to find the cabin lights dimmed and a soft glow from the overhead panels. She reached for her notebook and began to write the outline of her speech. First, know your worth. No one can take your dignity from you. Second, speak truth with calm. Courage or voice matters. Third, lead with kindness. Change happens when we treat everyone fairly. Fourth, stand together when one person suffers injustice. We all lose. Fifth, build a future where respect lifts every life. As she wrote, she felt a steady calm fill her. The fear and shame of the morning drifted away, replaced by hope and purpose. She closed her notebook and looked at her father. He smiled and reached out to tousle her hair kindly. The flight attendant served water and juice. Chisha accepted a cup of water and took a small sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe her throat. She thought back again to the manager's office, the moment she accepted his apology. She realized that apologies could heal wounds, but only if they were sincere and followed by action. She trusted that her father's promise of a report would bring real change. Across the aisle, some passengers chatted quietly, unaware of the drama that had unfolded. A few cast glances toward Aisha, perhaps sensing something special about her. She returned their looks with quiet confidence. The plane leveled off in smooth flight. Aisha tucked her feet beneath her and gazed at the white sands of clouds flowing beneath them like rivers of cotton. She felt a gentle thrill at the memory of takeoff, that moment when the world fell away and the sky embraced her. Leaned in again. No matter what you face, he said, remember today. Remember how you felt, how you stood, and how kindness reached you in the end. Aisha nodded and closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the soft drone of the engines to lull her into peaceful thought. She pictured her arrival at the summit, the applause awaiting her, the chance to share her story. She imagined dozens of young faces looking up at her with hope. She thought of the promise she would make, to work so every child, everywhere, could fly free without fear or shame. As the cabin lights glowed low, Aisha relaxed into her seat, her heart full. She felt the power of one small act, her persistence combined. With the kindness of her father and the manager, together, they had turned humiliation into healing and pain into purpose. She knew that tomorrow, when she stood at the podium, she would speak not just of herself, but of every young person who deserved a fair chance. And in that moment, drifting high above the earth, Aisha understood that respect and love could lift. Anyone just as a plane could lift its passengers toward a brighter horizon. Aisha's heart pounded with excitement as the plane began its descent toward the capital city. Through the window, she saw patches of green fields and silver rivers shining in the afternoon sun. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, feeling a gentle thrill at the thought of what lay ahead. This summit was her chance to share her story, to turn a moment of pain into a lesson of hope for others. She opened her notebook and rehearsed her opening line in her mind one last time, whispering, "No one should ever feel small for who they are." When the plane touched down, Aisha stood quickly, smoothing her dress and gathering her belongings. Her father slipped out before her to sort their bags, and she followed him down the aisle with a smile. As they walked through the terminal, Aisha felt proud and calm. She remembered how scared she had been that morning, how her cheeks had burned when people laughed. Now she walked tall, knowing that her voice could matter. The people in the airport recognized her and offered quiet nods of respect. Some whispered, "You have courage." Others simply smiled. Outside the airport, buses waited to take delegates to the summit center. Aisha climbed aboard and found a seat by the window. She watched the city rush by tall buildings of glass. Wide roads lined with trees, cars and buses moving in neat lines. Her father sat beside her and pointed out landmarks. The ministry building where he worked. The old cathedral with its stone walls, the river where kayakers paddled. He told her he was proud of how she had handled herself. Aisha leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." At the summit hall, colorful banners hung from the ceiling and booths displayed projects from young leaders across the country. Aisha felt her chest tighten with nerves as she took the stage to practice her speech. The stage was wide and bright, with a single microphone and a small desk. She ran her fingers over her notes, feeling the smooth paper beneath her skin. Her speech began with the story of that morning at the airport, the confusion, the laughter. The moment her heart had felt heavy, she spoke of the power of respect, of how a kind word can heal, and how leaders must train every staff member to treat people with care. During practice, a group of students gathered near the front, listening. Quietly, a tall boy with a notebook raised his hand. "Miss Kamara," he asked, "how did you find courage to speak up?" Aisha paused and thought. She said, "I remembered that people make mistakes, but that I have worth and that my father loves me. I spoke calmly because anger would not have helped. Kind words can open doors." The students nodded, and one girl said, "I want to be brave like you." That evening, after the hall emptied, Aisha walked through the lobby with her father. Journalists approached them, microphones and cameras ready. A reporter asked her to repeat what had happened at the gate, Aisha spoke calmly into the microphone, sharing how the agent had laughed, how she felt small, and how her father had arrived to help. The story would be on the evening news. She imagined her village parents gathering by the radio to hear her words, and she smiled. The next morning, Aisha delivered her speech before a crowd of 500 young delegates. The hall was packed with chairs. Delegates came early and filled every seat. When her turn came, she walked to the podium, took a steadying breath, and looked out at the faces before her ears' eager eyes kind. She began, "Today I stand before you not just as a delegate, but as someone who has felt the weight of shame and the light of hope." She spoke of her morning ordeal, of the agent's cold refusal, and of how her father's calm voice had changed everything. She said, "Respect is more than a rule. It is a gift we give each other." She ended with, "Let us lead with kind hearts and open doors for everyone." The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some delegates wiped tears from their eyes. A few held signs that read, "Respect for all and kindness can change lives." Aisha felt tears fill her own eyes as she looked at the crowd. She smiled and waved before stepping back. Her father, sitting in the front row, stood and applauded, his face full of pride. The days that followed, the summit invited Aisha to join a youth committee on human rights training. She agreed, eager to help design a program that would teach airport staff, bus drivers, and government clerks to treat every person with dignity. She worked with students from other regions, sharing ideas and drawing simple posters with clear messages. Welcome all, listen first, and speak with kindness. She felt useful, connected, and hopeful. Meanwhile, back in the city, the airline issued a public statement. It apologized once more to Aisha and announced a new training program for all frontline staff. The program would include lessons on respect, diversity, and how to handle passengers calmly. The airline CEO said, "We must do better. Every passenger deserves to be treated with care." The story appeared in newspapers and online. People commented that it was good to see a large company admit its faults and make changes. 2 weeks after the summit, Aisha returned home. The ride from the airport felt familiar now. The same roads, the same fields. But everything looked brighter to her. She thought of her village and the school children waiting for her story. At home, her mother had baked a special cake, and her brother had drawn a poster that said, "Our hero." The family gathered in the living room, and Aisha showed them photos of the summit and read her new posters. Her mother's eyes shone with pride, and her brother hugged her tightly. That evening, after the celebration, Aisha and her father sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the dark sky. A soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden. Her father turned to her and said, "You have started something important. Your voice touched hearts, and now real change is happening." Aisha nodded, feeling warmth in her chest. She said, "I could not have done it without you." He smiled and answered, "You had the courage all along." In the weeks that followed, the youth committee held workshops in towns near and far. Aisha traveled with other students to teach respect lessons in schools and community centers. They acted out scenes where someone was treated unfairly, and then showed how kindness and speaking up could heal the moment. Villagers applauded, and teachers said they would add these lessons to their classes. Aisha felt proud each time she saw a child nod in understanding. At the airport, workers began wearing new badges that said, "Respect, Ambassador." The gate agents attended seminars with real stories of passengers. The manager who had watched Aisha's morning ordeal wrote in his report that he realized how a single laugh could hurt a person's heart. He said, "We must see each passenger as a human being first." The staff practiced polite greetings and calm voices. Some agents said they felt happier at work when they saw smiling passengers. Months later, Aisha received a message from the airline CEO inviting her and her father to the opening of the new training center at the airport. They traveled together and cut a ribbon of bright blue cloth. The center's wall had a mural showing people of many colors and ages boarding a plane with open arms. Under the painting were words in bold letters, "Every journey begins with respect." Aisha and her father took photos and shook hands with staff who thanked them for their help. That night on the ride home, Aisha looked out the car window at the lights of the city. She felt proud and calm. She thought of the morning she had almost been denied boarding, of how small and hurt she had felt. She thought of the long wait, the agent's refusal, and the moment her father had arrived. She realized that day she had learned more than how to fly on a plane. She had learned how to lift others with her words. Back at home, she opened her notebook and wrote down a final note. One voice can make a difference. One act of kindness can open hearts. Let us all speak up, stand up, and treat each other with care. She dated the page and closed the notebook. She knew her story would travel far beyond her village and her country. She hoped it would remind people everywhere that respect is simple, but its effects are powerful. As she went to sleep that night, Aisha dreamed of planes carrying children to new places, of open doors and friendly smiles, of a world where no one is laughed at or turned away. She dreamed of a future where everyone's journey began with respect and ended with hope. And in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning.